When I was 32, my sister twisted my arm so hard I couldn't move my fingers, yet all my parents did was laugh. "Walk it off," my dad clapped. "Stop being a baby," my sister sneered. And my mom? She just smiled and called me useless. I thought it was just another cruel game. Until the paramedic's face turned pale and whispered, "Call the police." Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I promise, you'll want to hear what the MRI revealed. Because my family's secret? It was darker than anyone imagined. I remember the air feeling heavy that Sunday, like the Houston humidity had seeped into my bones. I had just clocked out of another long shift at the store, still in my faded retail uniform, the kind that clung to you no matter how much you wished you could shed it before walking into a crowd. But there was no time. My father had made it clear, family gatherings aren't optional. So I drove straight from work, the steering wheel still warm from the sun, my chest tight with the same dread I always carried when I knew I'd be the punchline. As soon as I stepped through the back gate, I felt their eyes on me. The backyard looked picture perfect. The trimmed lawn, the grill smoking, neighbors and relatives balancing paper plates piled with food. I could see the polite smiles. They weren't really for me. They were for the image of a happy family my parents liked to display. Delphine spotted me first. She was standing near the patio, her sundress crisp, her nails done in a shade that probably cost more than my whole outfit. Her smile stretched wide, but I knew that smile. It was the one that always meant trouble. "Well, look who finally showed up," she called out, her voice just loud enough to cut through the laughter and clinking glasses. "Still rocking that glamorous retail uniform, huh?" A ripple of laughter broke out, some nervous, some genuine. My cheeks burned, and I forced a smile, pretending not to notice. I kept walking, clutching a paper cup of lemonade, trying to find a quiet corner, but Delphine wasn't done. She moved closer, lowering her voice just enough so only the nearest guests could hear. "You should thank me, Mari. At least now you're providing the entertainment." I froze when she reached for my arm. "Delphine, don't," I whispered, my voice already trembling. "Oh, come on. It's just a game. Remember when we used to play this as kids?" she said with a mock sweetness that made my stomach churn. Her fingers wrapped around my arm, and before I could pull away, she twisted. The pain shot up so fast it stole my breath. "Delphine, stop." But she only laughed. "So sensitive, as always," she sang out, turning so the guests could hear her. More laughter. My father, leaning against the grill, clapped once like he was at a ball game. "She needed that. Might teach her not to talk back." The sting in my arm spread like fire, but what hurt worse were the eyes watching me, some amused, some uncomfortable, none willing to step in. I tried to pull free, my voice breaking. "You're hurting me." My mother, sitting on the patio with her wine glass, barely glanced up. "Useless girl, always causing trouble," she muttered, almost like it was an afterthought. Something in me wanted to scream, to shove Delphine away, to throw the cup in her face, anything. But another voice, the one carved into me after years of these games, told me to keep quiet. If I made a scene, I'd only prove them right, that I was dramatic, oversensitive, a burden. So I bit down on the inside of my cheek, willing myself to stay still, praying it would end quickly. The throbbing grew sharper, and I could feel my fingers stiffening. My breath came shallow, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall in front of them. I forced myself to smile, though my jaw shook with the effort. "I'm fine," I whispered, mostly to myself. Delphine finally let go, flicking her hair back like nothing had happened. "See? She's fine." She looked around as if expecting applause, but I couldn't move my hand. Panic crept in fast, cold and undeniable. I tried to flex my fingers, but they wouldn't respond. A chill ran down my spine, stronger than the heat pressing on my skin. And that's when I realized this wasn't just another one of her cruel games. Something was terribly wrong. As I stared at my hand, my fingers refused to obey me. A dull panic rushed through my chest, heavier with every second that passed. My arm pulsed in waves of pain, and yet around me the laughter continued, like I was the evening's entertainment. Delphine grinned wide, brushing her hair behind her ear, her voice sharp enough to slice through me. "So sensitive, as always," she sang out, leaning into the chuckles rippling through the crowd. My father's palms came together in a slow clap, like he was rewarding her performance. "She needed that," he said with a smirk, shaking his head as though this were all some valuable lesson. "Might teach her not to talk back." Every clap echoed in my head. Betrayal, louder than the throbbing pain in my arm. Across the patio, my mother sat back with her wine glass tilted against her lips. She didn't bother to hide her satisfaction. "Useless girl," she murmured, almost too softly, but I heard it. "Always causing trouble." She sipped as if my humiliation was a drink she'd been waiting to savor. My throat tightened. I can't move my fingers," I whispered, though my voice barely carried past my own lips. My words vanished into the laughter. No one reached for me. No one asked if I was okay. I was the only one in that backyard who seemed to understand how wrong this was. Some of the guests shifted uncomfortably. I caught sight of a couple near the pool, their phones held up, not to call for help, but to record. My face burned with the shame of knowing I was nothing more than content for someone else's amusement. Part of me wanted to scream, to force their attention, to make them see this wasn't a joke. But another part, the part trained over years of being called dramatic, warned me that raising my voice would only prove them right. If even my own family thought I was exaggerating, why would strangers believe me? So I sat there, tears blurring the edges of the bright Texas sky, trapped in silence. It was then I noticed her. A young woman I didn't recognize, standing a few feet away, her plate of food untouched. She wasn't laughing. Her expression had gone pale, her eyes fixed on my hand. I followed her gaze and saw what she saw. The swelling had already started, skin tight and red against the knuckles. She stepped forward quickly, her voice cutting through the noise with urgency I hadn't heard all day. "Wait, stop!" Delphine turned, annoyance flickering across her face. "What's your problem? We were just playing." The woman didn't flinch. She crouched beside me, her eyes scanning my arm with focus. "This isn't a game. Look at her hand. Something's wrong." I blinked, startled by the firmness in her tone. No one had ever defended me like that in front of my family. "She's fine," my father said dismissively, waving a hand like he was brushing away a mosquito. "She always pulls this kind of stunt." But the woman's voice sharpened. "No, she's not fine." She looked up, locking eyes with the guests who'd been recording. "Put the phones down. Someone needs to call 911. For a second, the world froze. The laughter stumbled into uneasy silence. I could feel every eye on me, not with amusement anymore, but with a creeping realization that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been lying. My chest heaved, the panic both sharper and softer now. For the first time that day, I felt a flicker of something besides humiliation, a faint spark of hope resting in the eyes of a stranger. And then her voice lowered, steady but urgent. "Don't move her. Something's wrong. We need to call 911. The moment Sierra's words cut through the air, it was as if someone had yanked the cord out of the laughter. The noise fell flat. The chatter, the smirks, the phones held up like weapons of mockery. Suddenly, they all stilled. I sat there on the patio chair, clutching my arm against me as though I could hold the pain inside. The swelling was worse now, creeping across my hand, stiffening my fingers until they looked like they belonged to someone else. My chest rose and fell too quickly, every breath jagged, but the hush that followed Sierra's voice pressed down even harder than the pain. She was at my side in an instant, kneeling so that her eyes met mine, calm and steady in a way that made me want to cry even more. "Can you feel this?" she asked softly, her fingers brushing the back of my hand. I shook my head. It was all I could do. Behind her, my father let out a sharp breath, the kind that said he'd had enough. "She's being dramatic," he barked, throwing a glare around at the guests. "Walk it off, Marisol. You'll be fine." I flinched at his tone, as if his words alone could bruise me. My mother leaned back in her chair, swirling the wine in her glass as if this were nothing more than background music. "Every time there's an event," she muttered with that familiar smirk, "she finds a way to make it about herself." The words hit harder than the ache in my arm. I swallowed, willing myself not to cry in front of them. Not again. Sierra didn't so much as blink in their direction. She slipped her phone from her back pocket, her movements deliberate, her voice low but firm. "I'm calling 911. That broke the tension like glass shattering. A few guests looked at each other, the unease spreading across their faces. Phones that had been raised for recording were quietly lowered, tucked into pockets. Some cleared their throats, trying to look anywhere but at me. Delphine crossed her arms, her posture loud with defiance, even though her face had lost some of its shine. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. But there was a flicker, just a flicker, of doubt in her eyes when Sierra gave her a sharp look. "You think I'm joking?" Sierra's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it carried farther than any shout. I wanted to sink into the ground. Part of me was terrified that if Sierra stayed, she'd end up the next target of their mockery. Another part of me, though, one I hadn't felt in years, clung to her presence like a lifeline. The guests shuffled, whispers spreading like smoke. I caught phrases. That doesn't look right, and should we? Their uncertainty cracked the wall my family had built around me for so long. A memory surged without warning. I was 9, running through this same yard, knees scraped from a shove I'd never seen coming. Delphine had grinned then, too, while Dad told me to toughen up. "Stop being a baby," he'd said, his voice dismissive as he pulled Delphine close. Mom hadn't even looked up from her gardening gloves. And now here we were again, same yard, same dismissal, same pain. Only this time, someone had finally seen me. Sierra put a steady hand on my shoulder, grounding me back into the moment. "You did the right thing speaking up," she said quietly, so only I could hear. "You're not overreacting. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Her words slipped through the cracks in my defenses like sunlight through shutters. I nodded, though the tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Not from weakness, not from shame, but from the jarring sensation of finally being believed. And then, faint at first, but growing louder, the sound reached us, the distant wail of sirens cutting through the Houston evening. The color drained from my father's face, not with concern, but with something colder. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, and I knew this wasn't over. The sirens grew louder, their echo bouncing off the brick houses of our neighborhood, painting the evening air with a shrill warning. My father's face flushed red, not from concern, but from something darker, rage simmering just beneath the surface. I felt the weight of his glare even as Sierra's calm voice tried to ground me. By the time the flashing lights spilled across the lawn, the guests had shifted nervously, some retreating closer to their cars, others pretending to check their phones as if they hadn't been watching, and laughing, just moments before. 2 paramedics rushed through the gate with a stretcher. A woman with sharp eyes and steady hands knelt beside me. "I'm Catherine Morales," she introduced quickly, her voice brisk but kind. "We're going to take care of you. Can you try wiggling your fingers for me?" I focused all the strength I had left, willing my hand to move. Nothing. The panic surged higher. Sierra leaned closer to me. "It's okay. You're safe now." Behind her, my father stepped forward, his voice cutting through like a blade. "This is ridiculous. She's fine. She always pulls stunts like this." The paramedics ignored him. Catherine exchanged a grim look with her partner, then whispered something I couldn't hear. I caught only the tightening of her jaw as she reached for her radio. My mother, still clutching her wine glass, shook her head with a sigh. "She'll be walking by tomorrow. You'll see. She's always been dramatic." Her words dripped like poison, casual but meant to wound. I wanted to scream that I wasn't making this up, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I whispered to Sierra, "I can't feel my fingers." Her eyes softened. "That's all I need to hear." The murmurs from the guests grew louder. I noticed a few of them lowering their eyes, as if shame had finally settled over them for the way they'd laughed earlier. Then a new voice broke the tension. A tall man in plain clothes, a badge clipped to his belt, stepped onto the driveway. "Detective Radcliffe," he introduced himself, scanning the crowd. "What happened here?" Sierra straightened, her voice calm and steady. Her sister twisted her arm. I saw the swelling. She couldn't move her hand. The detective's gaze flicked from Sierra to me, then to Delphine. My sister crossed her arms, her jaw tight, though for once she didn't rush to speak. My father's face went crimson. "This is a family matter," he roared. "You don't need the police in our home." "Sir," Radcliffe replied evenly. "When medical responders suspect abuse, it's my responsibility to be here." My mother chimed in quickly, raising her glass like she was toasting the absurdity of it all. "My daughter's just dramatic, officer. She does this for attention." The words sliced through me, leaving me trembling on the stretcher. For years, I had let them define me with those same dismissals. But something in Sierra's steady presence gave me the courage I hadn't known I still had. My voice came out small, shaky, but it was there. "It's not the first time." The crowd froze. Even the hum of the radio seemed to quiet. I had never said those words out loud, not to anyone, not even to myself. The truth, once spoken, hung heavy in the air, undeniable. Detective Radcliffe studied me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "We'll take it from here." The paramedics lifted the stretcher, adjusting the straps as they prepared to move me toward the flashing lights in the driveway. My father lunged forward, his anger boiling over. "You'll regret this, Marisol. You've ruined everything." Those words pierced deeper than any twist of my arm, echoing louder in my chest than the sirens themselves as they wheeled me toward the ambulance. Those words followed me into the ambulance, echoing louder than the sirens. "You've ruined everything," I lay flat on the stretcher, the ceiling lights above me passing in quick bursts as the paramedics pushed me through the ER doors. My arm was immobilized now, wrapped tightly, but the pain had spread deeper, into my chest, my breath, even my bones. The sterile brightness of the hospital made everything feel surreal, like I had been dropped into a place that couldn't possibly be real. Sierra stayed close, her hand brushing mine before a nurse guided her back. I could still see her worried eyes as the curtain closed around my bed. "Doctor." Patterson introduced himself quickly, his voice calm and firm. "Marisol, we're going to run some tests, including an MRI. We need to know the full extent of the damage." Before I could answer, my father's voice pierced the air. He'd managed to push his way in with my mother right behind him. "She doesn't need all this," he barked. "She'll be fine. She always bounces back." My mother crossed her arms, her wine-sweet breath filling the room. "She's wasting everyone's time," she added, her eyes rolling. Dr. Patterson didn't even flinch. "Sir, ma'am, this isn't optional. I need to make sure she hasn't sustained permanent damage. Now please step aside." His words carried the kind of authority that made my father bristle, but even Brennar knew better than to push harder against a doctor in a hospital hallway full of witnesses. The detective appeared at the foot of my bed, his notepad in hand. Detective Radcliffe didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Marisol," he asked gently, "has this happened before?" My throat tightened. Images flashed through my mind. Delphine pushing me off swings, twisting my wrists during games, my parents laughing when I cried, telling me I was too sensitive. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Yes." Since we were kids. The silence in the room was heavier than the machines around me. My mother's lips parted like she might speak, but nothing came out. My father looked away, jaw clenching so hard I thought he might break a tooth. Sierra slipped through the curtain again, ignoring their glares. She squeezed my good hand softly. "You don't have to be silent anymore," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. For a moment, I almost believed her. But guilt pressed hard against my ribs. Betraying my family, speaking those words, it felt like I had stepped off a cliff with no way back. The nurse returned to prepare me for the MRI. As she adjusted the straps, I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the faint cracks to keep my mind steady. I tried to convince myself it wasn't too late to take it back. Maybe if I tell them I exaggerated, maybe if I just forgive them again, it'll stop. But then I heard my father's voice in my head, sharp and cold. "You've ruined everything." Something inside me shifted. No, I couldn't keep letting their words define me. I couldn't let them bury the truth again. When Dr. Williams, the neurosurgeon, stepped in briefly to explain the scan, I listened carefully, nodding through the haze of fear. His tone was clinical, but the concern in his eyes was real. "We'll see exactly what's going on," he assured me. As they wheeled me toward the MRI room, Sierra's voice followed, firm but gentle. "You're doing the right thing, Marisol. Don't let them take this from you." The hum of the machine filled my ears as I lay perfectly still, the sound vibrating through my bones. My chest tightened with both dread and fragile hope. This machine will show the truth my family always denied. When the images came back, I wasn't ready for what they revealed. I lay perfectly still, the faint hum of the machine still echoing in my ears, as Dr. Patterson and Dr. Williams entered the room together. Their faces told me more than I was ready to hear. Somber, heavy, as though they carried a truth too painful to deliver. Dr. Williams pulled up the scan on a monitor. The gray and white images glowed in the dim radiology room, shadows cutting across the bones of my arm. "This," he said gently, pointing with a pen, "is a clean fracture. But there's more here." My breath caught. "More?" He clicked to the next image. "You see these lines?" His voice was steady but grave. "They aren't from today. Some of these are older fractures, untreated." For a moment I thought I'd misheard. My heart pounded so loudly that his words almost blurred into the rhythm. Dr. Patterson leaned closer, his tone firm but kind. "These injuries happened at different times. Months, maybe even years apart. They've healed unevenly." My father's voice cut through the sterile quiet, harsh and booming. "She's always been clumsy. Fell off bikes, tripped over her own feet. That proves nothing." My mother scoffed, her arms folded tight across her chest. "She bruises like a peach, always exaggerating. You doctors are making a fuss over nothing." Their words sliced at me, the same way they always had, but now I wasn't alone in hearing them. Detective Radcliffe, standing just inside the doorway, didn't look away from the screen. His voice was calm, low, and certain. "Marisol," he asked, "have you been injured like this before?" Tears burned at the corners of my eyes. My lips trembled as I forced the truth out. Yes, since we were kids, they told me I was just sensitive, that I needed to toughen up. The silence that followed felt like the air itself had frozen. Sierra stepped closer, her voice quiet but unwavering. They gaslighted you. You doubted your own pain because they wanted you to. Her words cracked something open inside me. Years of brushed-off bruises, twisted arms, and mocking laughter rushed back. I had buried them so deep I almost believed their lies myself. But now, staring at those images, I couldn't deny it anymore. The evidence was right there, etched into my bones. I wanted to collapse into the relief of finally being believed, but the grief hit harder. My entire childhood had been a lie wrapped in laughter and claps of approval. My father slammed his fist against the wall. This is absurd. You're poisoning her mind, filling her head with nonsense. My mother snapped. You'll regret this, Marisol. Family doesn't betray family. But Radcliffe stepped forward, his voice measured. This isn't betrayal. This, he gestured toward the glowing screen, is a pattern of assault, and it ends tonight. I looked at the detective, my breath shaky, my body trembling from more than the pain. Inside, guilt wrestled with a fragile spark of resolve. They'll never forgive me for saying it, but maybe I'll finally be free. Doctor. Williams rested a hand on the back of the chair. We'll treat the current fracture, but you need to know. These scans prove there's a history here. You're not imagining this. For the first time, I nodded without doubting myself. It wasn't me, I whispered. I wasn't dramatic. They lied to me. Radcliffe picked up his phone, his expression unshakable. We'll need to file charges tonight. The room spun as his words sank in. Terror gripped me. Charges meant exposure, fallout, and a family that would never see me as one of them again. But beneath the fear, something new stirred. A quiet, fierce relief. They were no longer untouchable. Those words felt both terrifying and freeing. My parents were no longer untouchable. I barely slept that night, my body aching, my mind replaying every echo of laughter that had followed me since childhood. By morning, the hospital had shifted into its usual hum, carts rolling down the halls, nurses speaking in clipped tones, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. I sat upright in a stiff chair inside a small consultation room, my arm bound tightly in a sling, waiting for Detective Radcliffe. He walked in carrying a manila folder, his expression calm but focused. Marisol, he began, settling across from me. The medical evidence is clear. We have grounds for charges. My throat tightened. If I testify, I whispered, my voice barely above a breath, they'll hate me forever. Radcliffe didn't flinch. He leaned forward, steady and deliberate. They already made their choice when they denied you care. Hate isn't yours to carry. The truth is. Before I could answer, the door burst open. My father stormed in, his face red with fury. We won't let her ruin this family. His voice rattled the walls. Behind him, my mother glided in, her wine-colored jacket pristine, her chin tilted like a queen presiding over peasants. After all we did for you, she hissed, you repay us with this? Do you know what people will say? I couldn't speak. For a moment, shame tried to choke me again, the same way it always had. Then Delphine followed, arms crossed, lips curled in a smirk. So dramatic, as always, she sneered. But for the first time, I saw her eyes flicker, just a trace of doubt, when Radcliffe placed the folder squarely on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We have your behavior on video. Multiple guests recorded last night. Delphine's smirk faltered. Sierra stepped in quietly behind Radcliffe. Her presence was steadying, like a hand on my back I hadn't known I needed. You're not alone anymore, Marisol, she said softly. The truth is enough. The room seemed to shrink around me. My pulse hammered as images from my past flashed across my mind, birthdays ruined by sudden jokes that left bruises, whispered insults disguised as laughter, my father's applause each time I cried, my mother's smile behind her glass, every walk it off crashing over me like a wave. I drew in a breath, my chest tight, but my voice clear. I won't be silent anymore. My father's hand slammed against the table. Ungrateful girl, he roared. My mother's eyes narrowed to slits. Think carefully. Once you say this out loud, there's no going back. Delphine let out a bitter laugh. So what? You think a courtroom will care about your sob story? Radcliffe slid the folder toward me, opening it slowly. Inside were still images from videos, my sister's hand gripping my arm, my father clapping, my mother's smirk. Proof I'd never had before. They'll care when they see this, he said evenly. My breath caught. For years I'd lived in the shadows of their denials. And now, here it was, my truth, captured for the world to see. 1,000 fears ran through me, being disowned, cut off, labeled a traitor. Yet beneath them, something stronger pulsed. Maybe I'd lose them, but maybe, for the first time, I'd finally gain myself. Radcliffe's gaze didn't waver. They'll be served tonight. The room fell into a stunned silence. My parents' faces drained of color, Delphine's smirk collapsing into a glare. I sat there, trembling, knowing nothing would ever be the same. I thought that meant it was over, but my sister had one last move. By the time the sun dipped below the Houston horizon, the Vega house looked like a stage under harsh spotlights. Red and blue lights from the squad cars painted the street. Neighbors stood on porches, whispering, some clutching their phones. The sound of police radios cut through the heavy air as officers approached the front door. Detective Radcliffe walked beside them, steady as ever. My chest tightened when Brennar shoved open the door before they could even knock. "You have no right to barge into my home," he bellowed, his voice carrying down the block. Ivana trailed behind, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that hadn't seen a real tear. She turned dramatically to the crowd. "This is a witch hunt. My daughter, our own flesh and blood, dragging us through the mud." I sat silently near the entryway, my arm still cradled in the sling. I could feel their eyes on me, neighbors, officers, even Sierra standing just behind Radcliffe. For a moment, I wanted to shrink back, to disappear. Then Delphine appeared. She didn't storm or shout. She strolled in like she owned the place, holding a folder pressed tightly against her chest. Her face was calm, her lips curling in that all-too-familiar smirk. "Detective," she said smoothly, "before you embarrass yourself, you should see what my sister's been hiding." The folder landed on the table with a sharp thud. Inside were papers, medical notes, typed statements, even what looked like a psychologist's report. All of it painted a picture of me as unstable, dramatic, desperate for attention. My heart plummeted. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. They'll never believe me now, I thought, my throat closing. Radcliffe opened the folder carefully, scanning the pages. His face gave nothing away. Brenner's chest puffed with triumph. Ivana straightened her shoulders like a queen regaining her crown, and Delphine leaned back, arms folded, her victory smile widening. For a few seconds, the silence in that room pressed harder than any words. My stomach turned. Years of humiliation and gaslighting whispered again. "See? You were always the problem." Then Radcliffe looked up, calm as stone. "Interesting," he said evenly, sliding the folder shut. "But these don't change the MRI scans." He laid another folder on the table, opening it to the images from the hospital. "These injuries didn't happen overnight. They tell a very different story." Delphine's smirk faltered. Before she could speak, Radcliffe continued, pulling out a flash drive and signaling an officer. A small screen flickered to life as the video began to play. My breath caught. There it was. Delphine twisting my arm at the party, guests laughing, my father clapping, my mother sipping her wine. Then me, collapsing, clutching my hand, my face twisted in pain. The room shifted. Ivana gasped, her hand trembling around that useless tissue. Brennar's face darkened, and he slammed his fist against the wall, the sound echoing through the house. "This is ridiculous," he barked, but his voice lacked conviction now. Delphine's smile was gone entirely. Her eyes darted to the neighbors outside, to the officers watching her every move, to Radcliffe's steady gaze. I didn't move. I didn't plead. I didn't defend myself. Sierra's words echoed in my mind. The truth is enough. So I just sat there, my head held high, as their empire of denial crumbled. Ivana whispered, almost to herself, "This can't be happening." Brenner growled, pointing at me. "You've ruined everything." But for once their words didn't sting. They couldn't touch me anymore. Radcliffe stood, his voice firm. "Delphine Crowe," he said, locking eyes with her, "you're under arrest." The click of the handcuffs rang louder than the police radios, louder than the neighbors' murmurs. As the handcuffs clicked, I felt something I hadn't in years. Freedom. 2 years later, the echoes of that night still find me sometimes. But now they sound different, softer, like reminders, not shackles. The afternoon sun slid through the blinds of my small Houston apartment, striping the living room floor in gold. I set down my mug of tea on the side table, my fingers brushing against the folded hospital wristband resting nearby. I never threw it away. That little band wasn't just plastic. It was proof. Proof that the truth had finally been seen. I leaned back on the couch, letting the silence settle. My phone buzzed on the cushion. A text from Sierra. Outside. Got coffee. Hope you didn't forget the muffins. A smile tugged at my lips. Sierra, now a full-fledged nurse, had become more than the girl who knelt beside me in a backyard full of laughter and cruelty. She'd become family in a way I'd never truly known before. When she stepped in, the scent of roasted coffee filled the room. She handed me my cup, shaking her head. Still the same order. Black with 2 sugars, right? Some things don't change, I said, chuckling softly. We settled at the table, the hum of the city outside faint against our conversation. Sierra's laughter filled the room, warm and easy. A stark contrast to the stifling silence I'd grown up with, where every chuckle felt like it was aimed at me. As we sipped, my thoughts wandered back to the trial. I remembered sitting in that cold courtroom as Dr. Williams described the MRI images, how some fractures were months old, others years. I remembered the jury's faces when the party video played, showing Delphine twisting my arm while my parents sat back and smirked. I remembered the judge's words. Parents are meant to protect, not destroy. Brennar and Ivana were sentenced for criminal neglect. They'd been released early, now serving probation. Rumor had it they were trying to find ways back into polite society, but not a day went by when I didn't think about their last message, passed along through a cousin. We only wanted to toughen you up. I deleted it without a second thought. Delphine, though, had not been so fortunate. Convicted of aggravated assault, she was still serving her sentence. The smirk she wore that night had long since vanished in my memories. Sierra noticed me staring off and nudged my arm gently. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. Just thinking about how far we've come. Her gaze softened. You're not just surviving anymore, Marisol. You're living. She was right. These days, I worked as a patient advocate at Houston General. I sat with people who felt small and dismissed, who were told their pain was all in their head. I listened, I believed, and I fought for them when no one else would. Maybe that was the truest kind of healing, not forgetting, but using my own scars to help someone else see they weren't alone. Still, some nights the echoes came back. I'd wake up hearing my father's voice. Walk it off. Stop being a baby. I'd sit up, clutching that wristband, reminding myself, it wasn't weakness, it was survival. I stood and walked to my dresser, fingers brushing the smooth plastic. That band had been around my wrist when everything changed. Now it sat folded neatly, a quiet anchor reminding me I never had to prove my pain again. Sierra got up to leave, hugging me at the door. You know, she said with a grin, you've become the kind of woman I wish I'd had in my corner years ago. When the door shut behind her, I sat down with my phone. The support group app blinked with new messages. I hit record, my reflection staring back at me. My voice was steady. No one should ever have to prove their pain with broken bones. Have you ever been told you were too sensitive? Tell me your story. I promise I'll listen. I ended the recording and uploaded it, setting the phone aside. For the first time in a long time, the silence in my apartment didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. Family should never mean silence. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't useless. I was enough. And I always will be.